A leather jacket ended a cricket captain's career. Not a betting slip, not a suitcase of cash. A jacket. For years, cricket fans knew exactly which test match to point to as the greatest sporting gesture the game had ever seen. A captain who cared more about entertaining the crowd than protecting a draw. They were right that it was extraordinary. They were wrong about why it happened. January 2000. Centurion, South Africa. The fifth and final test of the series against England. South Africa led 2-0. This match meant nothing to the result. A dead rubber, as cricket calls it, the kind of match players quietly wish would just end in a draw. Rain made sure of that. 4 days of the test were washed out almost entirely. By the final day, a result looked impossible. Nobody expected a finish. Nobody expected a story at all. Hansie Cronje was South Africa's captain, not just respected, revered. Devoutly religious, famously disciplined, the kind of leader teammates described as almost incapable of cutting corners. On the fourth evening, his phone rang. A man introduced himself as Marlon Aronstam, a bookmaker. Cronje had never heard of him. To understand why an offer like that could even tempt a captain of Cronje's stature, it helps to know what international cricketers were actually earning at the time. Match fees for South African players in the late 90s sat around $1,000 a game. A single bookmaker's offer, $10,000, $15,000, $50,000 for information nobody would ever trace, dwarfed an entire career's honest earnings in a single phone call. Aronstam made an offer. If Cronje could find a way to manufacture a real finish out of a dead, rain-ruined test, forfeit an innings, set a target, make a genuine contest possible, he would donate R500,000 to a charity of Cronje's choosing. Cronje picked up the phone to Nasser Hussain, England's captain. Between them, they agreed to something cricket rarely sees. Both sides would forfeit an innings. South Africa would declare, England would forfeit their first innings in response, and England would chase a target of 249 on the final day, against a depleted amount of overs, for a result that had no business existing. England won by 2 wickets, with 5 balls to spare. It was one of the great finishes in Test history. Hussain called it a special thing. The South African coach called it the biggest favor anyone had ever done for the sport. Newspapers ran headlines about the golden age of cricket, about a captain who valued entertainment over caution. Here's what nobody in that stadium knew. The promised charity donation never arrived. Instead, days later, Aronstam visited Cronje's hotel room at the Sandton Sun. He handed him a leather jacket and roughly 50,000 rand in cash, a fraction of what he'd promised, and not a cent of it went anywhere near a charity. Officially, it was framed as a gift. Unofficially, it was a down payment, an opening move to buy access to South Africa's pitch reports and team information going forward. A result that took over cricket history books as one of the sport's most generous, spirited finishes was, underneath, a manufactured outcome, engineered for a bookmaker's convenience, purchased for the price of a jacket. That single test became known, in hindsight, as the leather jacket test. And it wasn't the beginning of Cronje's corruption. It was just the moment cricket finally found the loose thread. 4 months later, Delhi police released transcripts of intercepted phone calls between Cronje and an Indian bookmaker. The conversations discussed team selections, pitch conditions, and payments. Cronje denied everything, publicly, in front of cameras. He said it clearly. He had never received money, never spoken to any teammate about throwing a match. 2 days later, he called Cricket South Africa's managing director and admitted it was all true. The South African board launched the King Commission, a full public inquiry into what their captain had actually been doing since 1996. What emerged wasn't one bad decision. It was a pattern going back years. In 1996, an Indian bookmaker introduced through India's own captain, Mohammad Azharuddin, had first approached Cronje during a tour of India. He'd been offered money to influence a test in Kanpur. Teammates later testified he'd tried to convince them to go along with it. Azharuddin himself was eventually banned for life by the Indian board over his own role in the same web of corruption, meaning two national captains on opposing teams in the same era had both been quietly compromised by the exact same betting syndicates. By 2000, Cronje had allegedly asked Herschelle Gibbs to score under 20 runs in an innings, and fast bowler Henry Williams to concede more than 50 runs across his overs, both, according to testimony, for payment. Neither man actually received a cent. Williams injured his shoulder and barely bowled. Gibbs went out and scored 74 runs anyway. The fix, in that instance, simply failed on its own. Under cross-examination, Cronje broke down in tears. He described what he called an unfortunate love of money sitting alongside his genuine passion for the game and his teammates. Investigators later found roughly 70 bank accounts linked to him in the Cayman Islands. He confessed to accepting approximately $100,000 in total across 4 years for information and influence. He always maintained he had never deliberately lost a match outright, only sold information and occasionally nudged results at the margins. The United Cricket Board banned him from the sport for life that October, not just as a player. From coaching, commentary, any official involvement in the game at all. 2 years later, in June 2002, Cronje died in a plane crash in the mountains near George, South Africa, a cargo flight caught in poor weather, completely unrelated to the scandal. But it meant the story of Hansie Cronje ended before anyone ever really got to see what accountability or redemption might have looked like for him. Here's the part worth sitting with. If Marlon Aronstam had never picked up his phone that rainy evening in Centurion, cricket might remember Cronje today exactly the way it remembered him before that test, as one of the most disciplined, trusted captains the sport had ever produced. The leather jacket wasn't the crime that defined him. It was simply the first one anyone happened to notice. And here's what should genuinely unsettle you about that. The King Commission only existed because Delhi police happened to intercept unrelated phone calls months later. If those calls had never been recorded, the Centurion test stays exactly what everyone believed it was in January 2000, cricket's most generous, most spirited finish. Nobody re-examines a match that ended in celebration. The fix wasn't just hidden, it was actively rewarded with praise by people who had absolutely no reason to suspect anything. South Africa's relationship with Cronje's memory has never fully settled. Some still remember the captain who led the team with genuine skill and discipline for most of his career. Others can't separate that man from the one who sold information for a jacket and 50,000 rand. Both versions of him are true, which is precisely what makes this story harder to file away than a simple villain narrative would be. One match, one gesture the entire cricket world praised without question, one brutal consequence for a sport that had trusted its most trusted man completely. So here's the question worth arguing about. How many great sporting moments have you watched and simply assumed were exactly what they looked like? Tell me if this changes how you watch a dramatic finish. If stories like this are the ones you actually want more of, subscribe. This channel breaks down the moments in sport where the real story isn't the scoreline at all, every single week from a different corner of the game.